So Peter's not warning us about this broader use of the word. He's actually warning us of destructive heresies. That's how he modifies it. In verse 1, he says, false teachers will secretly bring in destructive heresies. What is a destructive heresy? Well, the King James is actually more helpful here. It calls them damnable heresies. Damnable heresies are any doctrine that destroys either the person of Christ or the work of Christ, and therefore the way of salvation through him. In other words, a destructive heresy is anything that inherently destroys the gospel itself. And there are three main heresies that fit this description that the apostles constantly fought against in the New Testament. First, we see the heresy of what's called Gnosticism. Now, Gnosticism is a complex and multifaceted philosophy, but at its core, it always destroys one primary thing: the incarnation of Jesus Christ. It always gives the wrong answer to the question, who is Jesus Christ? Whether he's a great man or a great prophet or a great teacher, Gnosticism always says that he is not truly God and truly man. The Apostle John addressed the heresy of Gnosticism in the book of 1 John. He says in chapter 2, verse 22 and 23, who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is Antichrist. He who denies the Father and the Son, no one who denies the Son has the Father. So John considered Gnosticism a damnable heresy. Secondly, we see the destructive heresy of legalism. Legalism destroys the doctrine of justification. Justification answers the one question, how are we made right with God? And the Judaizers in Paul's day claimed that in addition to believing in Jesus, one has to also obey the law in order to be justified before God. And the Apostle Paul addresses this in Galatians chapter 2, verse 21. He says, I do not nullify the grace of God. For if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. The Judaizers are right, Christ is dead in vain. And he calls this a damnable heresy in chapter 1, verse 9. He says, if anyone is preaching to you this gospel, let him be accursed. Thirdly, we see the destructive heresy of antinomianism. Now, antinomianism just means against the law. Anti, against, nomos, the law. Antinomianism destroys the doctrine of sanctification. Sanctification answers the question, how are we now to live to Christ? And this is what Peter is primarily addressing here in this second chapter. Antinomianism could be expressed in this way. Once saved, anything goes. And that's what these false teachers were teaching. Their confession is actually very subtle. They would say, well, we believe that Christ is truly God and truly man, so they would avoid the heresy of Gnosticism. They would say that we believe that Jesus died and rose again and that he alone is the Savior of the world, so they would avoid the heresy of legalism. So they seemed orthodox. But in the way that they lived their lives, they showed the heresy that they held to. They weren't denying Jesus as Savior. They were denying Jesus as their master. They were living as practical atheists. They were living immoral lives, and they were teaching other people to do the same thing.